now, and I recommend it highly to grandchildren. And my wife is very subtle. You know, she found out that I was supposed to give a testimony, and she subtly says, "Are you going to have notes, or are you just going to talk?" I understood what she was trying to say. I've been told twice today that there is a sermon this morning. God has a perfect plan for each of us, and sometimes though we use this mishmash plan of my plan and God's plan. 32 years ago I accepted a call for officership. 19 years old, went down to training college, was commissioned officer for 20 years, but then it was not God's plan anymore, it was mine, because I disobeyed and I was separated from officership. I was a husband, I was a father, I had to make a go of it, and so we started life over. I said the other night, we kind of lived our lives in reverse. I was 19, 21, an officer, 40, 41, I had my first car, we rented our first house together because I left home to go to training. So kind of lived it in reverse in that way. We went to Port Angeles because we had family that we could live with there, and we've been there ever since. Found a church there. We did attend the Salvation Army, but wanted to find a place for our children. Found a wonderful pastor at a church there. He became a wonderful mentor. We had some very massive needs in those 10 years. Most of it was restoration, especially for me, and God walked us through that. And it's been a blessed time, it really has. I look back on that as I was having to give a testimony. My first job outside of the Salvation Army, I was actually considered a CO, which was very ironic, but it was a correctional officer at the Clallam Bay Maximum Security Prison out west of Port Angeles. And so I felt that was kind of ironic that I wore a uniform, which I didn't really choose to do anymore at that particular point. But it was interesting. That job didn't last very long. I did not like that job. Took a job actually as a CO, correctional officer in town at the local county jail. Liked that a lot because I interacted with people a lot more. So that was just me. That didn't last because of some cutbacks and that. So I didn't. I went into the mortgage business. Not a good time to go into the mortgage business, you know, any of that, but kind of started in its heyday. Found a gentleman, daughters played softball together. Went there. One of the first gentlemen I ever spoke on the phone with said his name was William Booth. Now, that was a little strange. A member of the Foursquare Church. We had some wonderful conversations for that. We helped him with a loan. The amazing thing of that now, 10 years later, small town, knew his son-in-law and his grandchildren. Son-in-law played in the Adult Recreation League basketball. Children did. I officiate those games, and so had the wonderful conversation. Now, after we talked about the Salvation Army 8, 9 years ago, told him what I was doing back and had a nice conversation with him. It was kind of coming full circle and that, and it was interesting. I officiate high school basketball. It's been kind of a joy. It's a mixed joy sometimes. Did a district game, because we leave Port Angeles every once in a while. Did a district game in the Everett area in the playoffs. Noticed on the bench, and most people would not have noticed, a gentleman had cufflinks who was the coach of Lummi. He was from Bellingham, found out. Later on, they were Salvation Army crests. Nobody else would have recognized those. You know, when I was close to the bench, I noticed he kind of didn't like some of the calls I made, so I didn't appreciate that very much. But was able to talk to him afterwards. He was a very nice gentleman. There was no language that was inappropriate, and you know, he had maybe some right at times to question some. But interesting that I met a Salvationist, you know, on a basketball court in Everett when I hadn't been to Everett before in my life. All through that, didn't realize that God had a plan. A bumper sticker showed up in our house. It was always on the wall for really all 10 years. Well, not the first few, because we were living with family when we first started renting our own home. Jeremiah 29:11, it was referred to on Friday night. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. If you study that, that is given to the people when they are actually be punished. They're in captivity at that time. And, I don't know, we never really talked much about the verse. I went and studied it a little bit more because I thought it was ironic. My wife put it up. And he does have a plan. And then now the plan 10 years later is to be in charge of the Salvation Army in Port Angeles. We have applied for reacceptance as officers. That is working out. After 10 years, and I did preach, I went out to the prison. The ironic thing of the prison, I didn't like it out there, but in the church group that I got involved with, we went back on Tuesday nights and did the worship service there. And so I was going back, and they didn't like it that I used to be a correctional officer, and now I was coming to the program, because I was on the other side of the fence dealing with the offenders. But I preached a little bit, but then after 10 years, what do you say when your first Sunday back? It was easy for me because I spoke on grace and I spoke on mercy. Was given a second chance, and I highly recommend not only grandchildren, I recommend second chances. It is an exciting time. Rejuvenated, 51 years old, a grandfather. I keep mentioning that because that really is fun. A little 4 and 2-year-old just got to visit a couple weeks ago. 51 and starting over and having the time of my life at that. It was because of a faithful wife who wouldn't let that die, because I let that idea die many years ago now. But she wouldn't let it die, and so we are now serving in Port Angeles, where we lived for 10 years, and it couldn't be better, really. So I believe in second chances, and I can't figure out a whole different way of doing it any more than that, because God's hand has been all of it, and He continues to